All right, everyone, I think we're recording. So this is Group 2's first discussion for Dr. Grant's capstone class in the Educational Specialist Coaching Pedagogy program. So my name is Kelly Gordon, and I'll be the host for this discussion.
My name is Jennifer Maloney.
And I'm Rusty Waters, the horse guy.
All right, so we'll go ahead and start out with the first reading. The first chapter of the first reading talked about humor, and it talked about primarily how humor is a double-edged sword. So while humor can be a good thing, it's also important that coaches understand the right way to use humor and making sure that we're using it appropriately. One of the good similes that it used in the text said making sure that humor kind of emphasizes laughing with people versus laughing at people. So not creating that insiders and outsiders kind of circle, but in sharing a laugh, that it helps create a sense of belonging within your team. It helps people feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and a positive use of humor, according to Romero and I'm going to totally butcher this name, Pescolito, using positive humor, sorry, brain fart. Positive humor improves group cohesion, increased productivity, and increased mutual trust. Do you guys have anything to add about humor?
Well, you kind of said what I had written down. It really focuses on that cohesion aspect of a team. Again, including everybody, laughing with everybody, just kind of gets everybody on the same page, kind of brings the team together. And on page 224, it talked about how laughter builds that solidarity and that trust. It kind of, and it also, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in a second, but it also kind of relieves that tension when there's those tense moments or the stressful moments or the difficult moments. Sometimes laughter can be used to relieve that tension and that stress going on in that situation.
Really good job. I hope everybody can hear me. But I really like what Kelly was talking about with having a sense of belonging. And like Jennifer said, it really comes down to that cohesion part. But the book, it broke it down into pretty much like 4 parts. The first one was social identity, and that's kind of what Kelly was talking about with the sense of belonging in the group, using humor for a sense of belonging. The second one was tension regulation, and that's pretty much talking about coping strategies when you're facing uncertainty, maybe a new audience or something like that. The third piece was using this creativity. Lang and Lee labeled this as liberating humor. And the last one was power relations. And pretty much that had to do with leaving the right impression in front of an audience. Irving Goffman was the one who was talking about that. And I really liked what you were talking about, building that cohesion piece and trying to make it all fit. But I remember, and we've talked about the book. I remember some of the best coaches that I've been around. They always use humor in the right moments to break up, moments in a day or in a long season. And I always remembered how, so I try to do some of the same things. And, whether it's an attention moment, maybe before a big game, tension regulation, trying to use that as a coping strategy. Y'all want to add anything to chapter 18?
Well, I think sometimes humor also gives a little bit of vulnerability. It kind of like, and everything's always tense, but like if a coach is willing to laugh at themselves and like kind of involve the team to laugh with them and just kind of open themselves up to, hey, I'm gonna be laughed at because I did something kind of ridiculous or funny or whatever it is. Again, that goes back to that cohesion and that solidarity thing, but it also builds that trust, because if the coach is willing to kind of become vulnerable a little bit to say, hey, you can laugh at me all together, it's fine. You guys, the team begins to build that trust together of saying, okay, hey, we're in this tight knit unit or team, and we can have these opportunities to laugh and just trust that we're going to laugh with each other rather than at each other, and just kind of go at it that way.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. Like, using an example, when we go on our team bonding trip, like, we make everyone do karaoke, and it's not to embarrass people. It's just for everyone to, let loose. You're not being laughed at, you're laughed with. Like, nobody's actually really good at karaoke, so it just gives you an opportunity to let loose, be vulnerable, and for people to see the real you. But I think, like you said, Jennifer, it's so important for coaches to build that rapport with their athletes and have that relationship, because if you don't have that good relationship with your athletes and you try and poke and prod and make jokes, and sometimes it's just like that awkward, do I laugh, do I not laugh, that's not really funny because whatever. So it's really hard as a coach at first, until you get to know your kids, to kind of know when, how to use humor. Like, most recently, and I know somewhere in the book they talked about, the use of dark humor. And it's not a funny thing, but my assistant coach's house burned down. And so he's recently been making, house burning down jokes. And if the kids didn't have that relationship with him, it wouldn't be very funny. It'd be like, oh, well, my house burned down, so I don't have any clothes to wear. And it would just be an awkward moment, instead of relieving the tension and kind of turning it back around into a positive light. Like, hey, even though I lost everything, I still have softball, I still have you guys, I have my kids, I have a great job. So you can use humor, even if it's dark humor, and kind of turn it around to shine a light on the positive.
And Kelly, I love how you were talking about doing karaoke and letting everybody kind of open up and as a result, you kind of build better relationships. That you get a little deeper with a relationship there too, and it's kind of how one thing kind of piggybacks onto another, but I love that. The last thing I'll share is the book kind of says, shared humor creates feelings of belonging and community, but defining insiders implies at the same time exclusion of outsiders. And it says, using humor can take a number of forms, witty jokes, whatever, or even ridiculing, but it can be self-directed or other directed. But you do got to be careful sometimes. Is it making people feel like they're an outsider or insider? But I think when you do the karaoke stuff, man, and everybody jumps in, you're definitely not creating, an outsider in that matter. That's a great point.
Do you guys feel like you use humor? I know Rusty talked about like the 4 different ways to use humor. Which way do you guys feel like you personally use it the most?
And I'll give you an example for me, and this is just recent. I'm at a new school. I've been here probably 2 months now. The guys they know me now, but like, I'm very efficient. I try to be very efficient, very organized and serious. But I also understand that, if you're watching, for instance, video for an hour, at some point you're going to lose those kids, right? So you better be able to, break down the sections and kind of, crack a joke, but you got to get back focused right after that, right? After you have your fun and laugh and, whatever, boom, and now you're back going again, and it just kind of keeps everybody engaged too. And that's my opinion. That's one thing that I've done is use it in a video session it's no different than teaching. You're trying to keep your audience engaged too.
I think I kind of use it, and the text kind of talks about witty and indirect self-directing humor can increase the speaker's status. It also releases tension and building rapport. And I think I use it majority of the time when I'm trying to build rapport with my athletes. I've been in this school for a few years now, so a lot of them know me. But when you have those new kids come in, or those freshmen, at first they're kind of like, okay, does she mean this, or is it like, should we laugh? So I think I just kind of use it over and over again to build that. First of all, I try to build the relationship with the athletes so that they can kind of get to know me and know my style of humor. But I really just kind of use it to just, again, make myself feel vulnerable a little bit for them, while I'm trying to build that rapport and that relationship with them. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out, like during those tension times, do you use humor to release the tension, or is it too serious of a moment to use humor? So I feel like that one is a little bit more of a struggle, is figuring out, okay, we're in the middle of this really difficult drill. I want to make sure they're focused. Do I make a joke, or do I continue to let that focus happen, or whatever? So that would be kind of one of the weaknesses, is figuring out which types and when and during tension moments do we use humor. But majority of the time, building rapport and just kind of that vulnerability piece.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I think I use humor most often to build rapport with players. I agree about and I love humor. I think it's a great way to release tension and make your players feel like, hey, don't be afraid to make a mistake, because it's going to happen. You make a mistake, I make mistakes as coaches, everybody makes mistakes. And we live, we laugh, we move on. But I do agree, it's hard to find that balance of, is my team just not focused and not completing the drill, or is it too hard, or do they just need a new laugh to help them refocus? But at the same time, find that healthy balance with, hey, they need to know when we're being serious. So I would agree. I think that's my, I would say, weakness with using humor, is kind of finding that delicate balance of if and when. Do you feel like you have one, Rusty, that's one of those categories that's your weakest?
I'm not great at humor, but I would just say in general, just humor is probably my weakness. But I am aware that using it can be helpful. So I try to throw it in, when needed. And you can kind of tell, if you gotta, switch it up. You can kind of look at your audience, kind of judge and get that feel once you've been around kids for a couple of days and a couple of times, and it doesn't take long to figure out, what you got to do when you got to do it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say, is I think, as maybe at the beginning of the season, you're like, okay, when does the humor need to happen? But I think towards the end of the season, maybe towards postseason, at that point, your team, what they need to be prepared for a game, what they need to be able to perform well. So I think a lot of times towards the middle to end of season, you kind of gotten to know your team, and you realize what they need and what they can't have, because sometimes they can't hear a joke, right before a game, and it just kind of gets everybody off focus. So I think as you go through your season, and as your team starts to gel a little bit, I think you do start to learn a little bit of like, hey, it can happen or it can't. This is the time, this is not the time. So I think it just, again, goes back to just getting to know your kids and your team and how they gel together throughout the season.
Yeah, I'd agree. One of my assistant coaches had a great idea, coaching softball. The summer's a long season. You feel like you're doing the same thing. You feel like you never have your starting lineup there because they're at this travel ball tournament on vacation. So it's just like you're spinning your wheels until the school season starts. But one of my assistant coaches had the idea to, hey, let's teach the freshmen, because we have a big, wide open campus. Let's show them around campus by having a scavenger hunt instead of practice. And so it was silly. It was funny. It was fun. The girls were running around, but I feel like everyone comes to that point in their season where no matter what they do at that 2-hour practice, it's not going to make them any better. So it's time to kind of just step away and do something fun and remind them, hey, this is why we love to play football. This is why we love to play softball. This is why we love the people we're around, even though they drive us nuts every other day of the week. But I agree. I think humor is important.
And that goes back to the cohesion piece that Jennifer was talking about. Building cohesion. That's it's what you're doing. Building relationships, and building that team aspect.
Yep.
All right. Do we have anything else to add about humor, or can we move on to the next one?
I think we can move on to expectations or expectancy.
Perfect. Okay. So the second chapter talked about Feedback, expectations, expectancy. So at the beginning of the chapter, it kind of compared youth sports versus high school and college sports. So some of the points that it made about youth sports were that youth sports encourage maximum participation. So no matter what your age, your gender, your race is, they want everybody to play, regardless of your ability level. It talks about, while it might not be equitable playing time for all, that everybody gets the opportunity to participate. And it talks about how coaches are more apt to give the lower skilled players more feedback than the higher skilled. And then it transitioned to talking about high school and college, where things get a little more cutthroat, for lack of a better word. It's limited participation, so they start adding tryouts, they make cuts. Only the quote unquote, because everyone can argue this, only the best play. And then usually the higher skilled players get more feedback, more instruction, and more praise, whether it's praise at practice, whether it's attention in the media, but just overall in general, more attention from their coaches. Do you guys have anything to add with that?
Well, I think with that, sometimes, I mean, obviously your kids that are going to be on your field starting, like you want to continually talk to them and things like that. And I always tell my athletes, I'm like, it's when we stop talking to you that means, we've kind of given up on you. We may have told you the same thing 75 times and you're still not doing it. So I'm not going to say anything anymore. So I get where the chapter is coming from, with as far as feedback to certain kids and not. But I think there are some other factors that may go into kids at the higher level getting that feedback because they're coachable, they listen, they want to be there, they want to get that extra rep. And then the kids that have a lower expectancy or lower level, maybe not getting as much feedback, even though it should be the other way. And, you do want to try to develop those younger kids or those kids that are less experienced, but sometimes you've given them multiple chances and they're still not doing what you want. So you do have to stop, or I do. I don't know. Maybe that's bad of me, but I'm tired of telling you.
Yeah. And to specifically piggyback, what you were saying there, the book was talking about, and in junior high specifically, and I think it was talking about softball. It said low expectancy in junior high athletes, low expectancy athletes were getting more feedback. And I think it was Horn who was providing that information. And it said, however, and you were talking about, I think, youth recreational basketball, low expectancy athletes were getting less feedback in a study. It said the coaches offered equitable feedback to all youth basketball players, but these findings demonstrated the expectancy cycle is not uniform in youth sports. And like you were talking about, there's such a wide range of kids in rec. It's not just,
well, I think there's also a wide range of coaches too that may not know what they're doing. So at the rec league, when they're not doing a lot of feedback, they may not exactly know what type of feedback to give. So I would say that the level of coaching goes into that too.
I agree.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know how much you all deal with like feeder teams, middle school teams, but just looking at, the makeup of our feeder softball team, we've got girls that play high level travel ball, and then we've got girls who have only played rec ball coached by their parents. And so, like you said, Jennifer, it's not like the kids that have played rec ball can't do it. They've just never been taught any differently.
And I've even done it where like I've had a kid try out and I'm like, they're on the cusp, but I really think with good instruction, like we can get them there, and we'll give them a year. And if they're still not good, then it's, the next year they're gone. But especially as a freshman, they moved in or they weren't on a travel team or whatever. Like I tend to, like if I see at least a little bit of athleticism there, it's like, okay, let's see with a little bit of instruction, a little bit of feedback, if we can get them to where they need to be, I'm going to give them a chance. So that's kind of how I feel about that.
And it doesn't take long as a coach to kind of start seeing, well, if you give up on a kid too quick, and then you get these examples to draw back from. I remember when I was getting started, and I remember this kid was a freshman, and he was not good at all. One of the worst players on the team. But then 2 years later, I mean, he just developed out of nowhere, and boom, now he's a college prospect. And, you know, I learned a valuable lesson about, you know, some kids just develop at different times. And you know, you really got to keep trying to coach. If you know, you see those kids that have a little bit of potential there, you know, and because everybody develops just at different times. The book was talking about performance evaluations, and it said that expectations shape coach to athlete interactions, and therefore have the power to influence the course of social encounters in sport. You know, it says furthermore, research shows that expectations are formed in part on the basis of information that is really observable as soon as a performer is encountered. And I hope y'all can hear me. I'm just severely hoarse from coaching football and having to yell across the field sometimes. Yeah, just going back though, just to the development deal there, and kind of relating it to that development. Just, you know, it's amazing how, you know, the development of kids. You know, everybody's different.
Well, in the chapter, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I think we do need to go back to those 4 steps that are listed there. But it talks about like some strategies and some things, but it really just says expectations by the teacher or coach can impact development, and then it gives 6 different kind of strategies or things that you can use to maximize those expectancy effects. And I, like, as I was reading through them, I thought they were really good. They're on page 254, but just mindful of expectations we hold of athletes and regularly update the view of the athlete. I know a lot of times we have a kid that comes in and you're like, oh gosh, or, you know, this is going to be awesome. And we keep that expectation where it is, and we don't kind of let that fluctuate based on kind of where they are and as they develop and grow. And then set appropriate realistic performance expectations. I thought that was a really good one. Sometimes we have unrealistic expectations for our kids, so I thought that one was a really good, and just all 6 of them were really good strategies that I know that I'm going to take a few out of and implement into my program.
Yeah, I think the 5th one, it says athletes training partners during the course of a practice such that the same individuals are not always working together. You know, it's really easy. A lot of girls teams, especially, they say, you know, this team has cliques, that team has cliques. So I think it's important to kind of mix them up and mix up their ability levels too. You know, you can put all your middle infielders together, but, you know, your middle infielders can learn something from your outfielders can learn something from your catchers. Like, everybody can learn something from another position. And so I think it's important to build that team cohesion, you know, going back to that they work with different people, not just the people that they're closest with.
Well, and I think it also, if you put them in a position where they are not normally, they get like an appreciation for what that person at that position actually does. So like, I'll have them and we'll put them out there on the field, and then after a minute I'll blow the whistle and everybody literally rotate to your left. You know, we'll go by numbers on the position. So pitcher goes to catcher, catcher goes to first, and we rotate until everybody's gone to every position. But again, it's that team cohesion and your understanding my teammates are all just as important as everybody else, and you're building those relationships, that team cohesion, that trust, and then I mean it just tells you that everybody's role is vital on the team, and I think that's really important for our kids to understand. And also, as a coach, we need to understand that as well. If we are going to set these expectations for our kids, we need to understand what everybody does and how important it is. And I know it's easy for us to get it, but we need our kids to get it too, if we want to make sure that our kids are able to truly get the importance of everybody's role.
You know, I love the example you made there with changing positions. I remember when I was coaching some middle school baseball, you know, I feel like a lot of times coaches just put kids in one position, you know, and they really don't have room to grow as much, you know, as, you know, when they get to high school, the weakest position might be left field, you know, and can you play left field? You know, if you can hit, can you play this? You know, can you play that? You know, and we would try to move kids around in a similar manner so they weren't just playing one position, you know, and trying to get kids, you know, acclimated to some different spots. but also kind of what Kelly was talking about. I think it was the fifth one. Varying your training partners. We try to do that. Some in the weight room. If a kid, and they're all different. But if a kid is known for maybe skipping reps, we might put him in with a partner, that maybe has more discipline, or maybe has a leader role right there. Put him with him for a couple of days or even a week, and then switch that up with another guy, and try to get those impressions, learn from those impressions from those leadership guys. But the sixth one on that list said always convey high expectations of athletes in relation to discipline. I'm a firm believer in values and having values. I think discipline, definitely has to be part of your values and things that you talk about, things that you go back to, when times are tough, and this is why we do this. That boom. I think that those are also important. It's just having those high expectations for that, discipline, and it allows those athletes to see some personal growth.
I mean, I think if you set goals or expectations too low, I mean, it just, now granted, I think the realistic expectation part of what we were just talking about, I think, like your goal may be to win a state championship, but you set those realistic expectations along the way. And as they meet those expectations, then it's like, okay, I build confidence, and then I know that I can keep going. So I get a little bit of that, but I've always been, my expectations are up here, and it just challenges the athletes to continue to get better. I think feedback has to be, from the coach, whether it's good, bad, ugly, you still have to continue to provide that feedback. But I think high expectation for everybody, and the ones that are kind of struggling to get there, you got to find a way to get them to meet those expectations, or get, back with everybody else. Cause we know the weakest link on the team tends to bite us in the butt at some point.
That's the person to sit back when you need him most, right? Or her
100%. Or they screw up base running. Yep.
Always the case, or they're on base one.
Yep.
Yeah. I definitely agree with, setting those lofty and high expectations. What I've learned, transitioning from a school that the whole athletic department had. Oh, are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Okay, my thing just did something weird. Sorry. But transitioning from a school where winning the region championship was the expectation. If you did not win the region championship, it was like you had a fluke of a year. To now a school where we're just trying to stay afloat, like everyone talks about. We're okay with being mediocre. And so kind of, transitioning, still trying to keep those high expectations, but learning how to celebrate the little things and break it down a little bit. So, our goal, of course, is to play for a region championship, but, taking 2 out of 3 in a series from a team that we know we can beat, you can celebrate that and find a way to kind of encourage them and help the girls feel success. And then hopefully they'll get more success in the future. One of the things I liked that you pointed out, Jennifer, is you talked about, understanding and valuing each person's role on the team. And one of the points that it made when it was talking about high school and collegiate level athletics and talking about tryouts and making cuts and stuff, one of their points was that it only takes into account physical skills, not psychological. And I think, all of us have an experience where we have an athlete that might not be the best physically, but they're that glue player, they're that leader on the field. They're that person that, you can chew them out and spit them out, but they're still gonna, yes, ma'am, no, sir, whatever it might be. And they're just that person on the field that holds everyone together. And I'm sure you all have had experiences where there's an athlete that might be a higher skill level, but doesn't take criticism as well as a lower leveled athlete that wants all the feedback in the world. So like you said, it's hard to give equal feedback to everyone. You don't feel like you have enough time in the day. And that's why I think it was so interesting. One of Solomon's studies from the book said that assistant coaches provide more equitable feedback. And I don't know, just thinking about it in my time as an assistant coach versus a head coach, I guess assistant coaches don't have to worry as much about, do I have a bus scheduled? What are our kids eating? When are they getting out of school? Did I bring the lineup? Did I pack this? So I just thought that was an interesting point. Trying to think. There was one other point that I wanted to talk about that I thought was interesting in this chapter, and it's on, let's see, page 250 at the top, and it says, therefore, youth sport experience must be privately funded, and parents might expect their child to get their money's worth. Youth coaches might be sensitive to this personal investment, which may become translated into their feedback patterns. And I just thought that was an interesting point because I don't think that's something that is unique to youth sports. I think, in high school and college sports, you get a big booster that gives a lot to the program, that volunteers a lot of their time and their money, and their kid might not be very good. And it's hard to, you don't want to lose that booster. You don't want to lose that support. But at the same time, if their kid's not there, their kid's not there. So how do you guys feel about that statement?
Well, I mean, I've had booster clubs, and when it's a new booster club or a new booster club member joins, my first statement to them every single time is, if you are on this board to get your child playing time, to give them a starting position, whatever you think it might be, that's not how this works. And I preach to my kids from day one that they earn their spot by what they do on the field and what they do off the field. So I get it, because I have had some big boosters, or somebody that does a ton, and you're like, gosh, I just wish the kid was so much better. But you try to find ways to praise them for, the parent for doing what they're doing, the kid, if they're working hard, you try to give them opportunities, and reward them for what they're doing. But I don't think, I don't do that. I don't say, okay, well, you've done X, Y, and Z, so you automatically get this. That's just not how I run my program. Because I think the players will see through it too, and they'll start to lose that trust in you, and the team chemistry will go down because of that.
Correct. And then that expectancy kind of sources there. I know Kelly was talking about being at a school where it was like win at all costs, and it was all about winning. I've been places like that too, and I think it's just so much more than that. I think you're really missing the boat for sure if you're just coaching and winning. I believe in coaching, life skills and values and having standards. The book on page 251 it was talking about. It said athletes who played for successful coaches were aware of the expectancy sources employed by their coaches. It said athletes on less successful teams were not accurate in identifying the expectancy sources utilized by their coaches. I think that goes back to kind of, if you're what are you coaching? Is it, but I also, you were talking about the booster club, and I know I'm kind of bouncing around here, but, I also believe in trying to incorporate every kid on the team in some capacity, making the worst players on the team feel have an important job or something that you can find, calling out their names, because a lot of times, those guys are forgotten about, those girls are forgotten about a lot of times. But making everybody feel a part of it. The booster club, a lot of times in my experiences, and I've never coached a girl sport, so I can't really, say that it's the same way in a girl sport, but, a lot of times those athletes are maybe not as good as another kid, right? But trying to find places or roles they can fit. Is it maybe can they be a base runner? Can they be something, or whatever it is.
Well, I think, and it says in the book that it says successful coaches are better at communicating their expectations. I also think if you communicate the roles to the players, I'm not saying that like, okay, hey, you're not a starter, you're stuck in that position. I'll never say that. But I think if you continuously show or find ways to appreciate the kids wherever their role is, whatever they're doing, and if they are a bench player and they are like the best teammate on the bench, you got to find ways to praise them for that, because otherwise, when you need it the most at the end, that team chemistry is going to be bad because you have that bench player that doesn't feel appreciated, and now they're bad mouthing the team, and now they're just done with the season. So I think communication has got to be key and finding ways to reward them. But I think up front, it's got to be a communication of, hey, these are the expectations of everybody, no matter the role. And we also need to make sure we're appreciating everybody for what they bring to the team, because, we need everybody to make this work.
Yeah, I think in both situations, you can be the best communicator about the role. You can be the best communicator about, the purpose of the booster club. You're not here to get your kid playing time. You're here to help this program run. And I think, unfortunately, as coaches, there's no magic words that we can say to make everybody understand that. And I think that's kind of a battle that coaches as a whole will be fighting forever, honestly. Do y'all have anything else to add to that one, or do you want to move on to the next chapter?
I say we move
I
on.
think I did a really good job there.
All right. So the next chapter talks about race and I can't talk. I'll laugh at myself. Race and ethnicity. So it talks about, the differences between race and ethnicity. So race refers to a population of people who are believed to be naturally or biologically distinct from other populations, versus ethnicity being different from race. So ethnicity refers to a cultural heritage that people use to identify a particular population. So they move on to talk about the majority and the minority. And I know this is always a hot topic in sports today. While I grew up in a school where 99% of the school was Caucasian. And because I was 50% Filipino, I was part of the minority. I was one of 5 kids at the school that was not fully Caucasian. And so I think when it comes to race and ethnicity, I believe it's a lot about the environment that you were raised in. If you were raised in a diverse environment, then you have an appreciation for different ethnicities, different races. But if you weren't, it takes time to learn those things. And I'm not saying that you can't learn those things, but it definitely takes some experiences and some interactions with people of different cultures in order for you to appreciate them.
And I ran off because I just got done reading this book. It's called The Locker Room. It's by Stephen Mackey, who is on Twitter. He does these really cool character sports things, and Damon West. But this book is all about how, and it just made me think of it, but the star quarterback of the football team made a racial comment at a party at some point, and head coach is a white coach, assistant coach was African American, and it just talked about how at the beginning the head coach just kind of like handled it with the quarterback and just said, we're done with it. And then it just talked about how that hurt the rest of the football team who was not white, and it just talked about how the team had to just communicate, because the different races didn't understand the different things that everybody else was going through. And it really took that team saying, you know what, we're not practicing today. The coach got really vulnerable and was like, I don't understand the different, I didn't think that I was racist. I just didn't know. And I mean, it's a very short read, but it just literally everything that I read in this chapter talked about just what was in that book. And it really came down to the team just needing to communicate, talking about how they felt. Again, it was about a racial comment that was made, but the whole team just communicated about, okay, how did this make me feel? And then, the kid that actually said it was like, I had no idea that I meant it this way. And the coach was like, well, our expectations are that you're going to be kicked off the team. And anyways, the team at the end just finally said, I'm glad we were able to communicate. Everybody started to understand each other. And, we realized you didn't mean it that way. So again, it just talks about communication. And I think that's big, because everybody you don't know what's going on with every other race and what they're going through and things like that. And so I think communication and just understanding with a little bit of grace is one of the biggest things that it talked about in this book. And as we go through the chapter, it kind of, again, just that's kind of what I kind of thought of.
Yeah, great point. It's amazing that, you can be considered just a great coach, but if you don't know how to handle those situations in a positive manner as possible, then you're doomed for failure, because those things can go south quick. situations like that, many teams have went south dealing with those matters. And, you know, it's a touchy subject, but it's a subject that, you know, is right in the forefront of coaching today. I know the book on page, in that chapter, it was, it alluded to, it's like nobody is born with a racial ideology. And it says we acquire it over time as we interact with others and learn to give meaning to physical characteristics such as skin color, eye shape, the color of texture of hair, whatever. And it said the meanings become the basis for classifying people into racial categories and associated categories with particular psychological and emotional characteristics, intellectual and physical abilities, and even patterns of actions and lifestyles. And then, you know, right above that, it was talking about, you know, racial stereotypes. And it was talking about, you know, race and racial ideologies and how they foster these stereotypes, which are generalizations used to define and judge all individuals who are classified into a particular category, you know. And it's amazing, though, how your views are shaped by the people you hang around, by, you know, your parents, your grandparents, your friends, you know, and how they think, and it affects how you think.
Yeah. I had a similar situation to that book. You know, we had a student transfer in as a freshman from another school in the county that was predominantly white, what most people would call the country school of the county, and made a comment at basketball that was overheard by two of our black players. And, you know, they were upset about it. And I talked to them. I said, you know, did you talk to her? Did you tell her why this was wrong? Did you say or tell them how you were feeling? And I think, you know, that whole communicating with one another and having that tough conversation is so important because, like you said, she didn't know that what she said was offensive. But being able to have the courage to, you know, talk about that kind of stuff is super important. It says at the end of the chapter that they must learn to live, work, and play together despite diverse experiences and cultural perspectives. Meeting this challenge requires a commitment to equal treatment, plus learning about the perspectives of others, understanding how they define and give meaning to the world around them, and then determining how to form and maintain relationships while respecting differences, making compromises, and supporting one another in the pursuit of goals that may not always be shared. None of this is easy, and challenges are never met once and for all time. And I think, you know, that summarizes the purpose of a sports team. You know, you all have a common goal. Your common goal is to win a region championship, win a state championship, win a game, whatever it might be. But you're going to have a melting pot of different races, different backgrounds, different skill levels. And your success is kind of based on how you all gel together. You know, they always talk about some of the best teams might have had the most talented players, but they couldn't get along for whatever reason, and then they weren't successful. So I think that's, you know, overall the battle that we're fighting with race in sports.
Well, I think I think in athletics, that is the best way to manage different backgrounds, different experiences. Like I think sports just teach you so much because I mean, it literally is like you're different from me. You've had different experiences. You're from this different place, but you know what? We have one goal, and I think you build that relationship and that appreciation for everybody because you have that common goal, and I don't care who you are, what's going on. I just want everybody going in the same direction. So I think sports are a great way to teach those life skills that they're going to need as they go out into the real world. And, you know, and the last thing I'll say is I think as the coach, you set the expectation for how things are going to be run in your program. So what you allow is what's going to happen. And it could be you allow comments to be made or you just allow a comment, but, you know, maybe you overheard it and you don't address it. But I think as a coach, especially with diversity, you've got to say this is how things are going to be done, and then if something happens you have to be willing to step into that situation and address it because you may think you're doing the right thing by letting it slide or addressing it one-on-one, but I think at that point, you know, with with the rest of the team, they need to see that the coach is willing to stand up for them as well, whoever it is, but just standing up for the rest of the team that was not involved in that situation immediately.
And, I hope I don't bounce around with this too much, but there was another reading, White Privilege, and it was talking about having categories, and it was talking about, I've never been accused of getting a coaching job due to my race. Well, another thing is, as an athlete, do we let certain maybe races or maybe a gender maybe challenge us, but not the other? You know what I mean? And those are questions, and you were talking about what you allow, are you the same for everybody? As opposed to in the book, though, in that chapter, it was talking about a soccer coach, Mario Valeri. And I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but he came up with a couple of 3 primary expressions of racism in soccer, and it was direct racism, indirect racism, and racism on the field. And, specifically, the third one, racism on the field, it says, it's negative racial, ethnic, and religious comments made by players, coaches, and referees. An example of this is players using slurs to opponents or referees. And, I think there's certain situations that coaches maybe have not been a part of, but I can almost guarantee you, we've heard players or other coaches talk to the refs or, whoever in a racial way, or whatever, or heard somebody in the stands, and going back and, having those talks with what's acceptable and what's not acceptable behaviors is important, in my opinion.
Do y'all have anything else to add about race and ethnicity, or should we move on to the last chapter?
I think we're good to move on.
All right. So the last chapter talked about emotion. And on page 237, there's a quote by Turner and Stetz that said, emotions are the glue that bind people together. Later on, it says, conversely, emotions are also what can drive people apart and push them to tear down social structures and challenge cultural traditions. So this chapter kind of talks about how emotions play a role in coaching, and talks about, there's a quote later on that talks about, as a coach, we have to try and put our emotions aside for the good of the team, and to make the best decisions. And I'm sure you guys can agree, we did not get into coaching. We did not get into teaching for the money. It's something that we're passionate about. So there are times when it's really hard for us to separate our emotions from our career, because, we're just so invested in it. And I think, personally, that's a challenge for me. I'm super invested in all of our kids, super invested in the program. And when things don't go the way I hope they do, it's hard because you pour so much into one thing that it's hard to see it not pan out.
Yeah, because the chapter said that there's integral connections between emotion, cognition, and action. So like the emotion happens and then it kind of influences how you think and how you act. And, as a coach, we kind of have to control that and make sure we're doing that and releasing that in an appropriate way. And, we may get mad, we may get overly excited, but we also have to realize that we're a role model for our kids. And when that emotion happens, we need to make sure that we're thinking and acting and speaking in an appropriate way to kind of manage that emotion for them, as their role model and their coach.
Yeah. And, Kelly, you were talking about the glue. You were talking about players and being the glue. And the book alluded to on 237 as emotions are the glue that bind people together and generate commitments to large-scale social and cultural structures. In fact, emotions are what make social structures and systems of cultural symbols viable. And that's parables when it says emotions are the glue. You better have your handle on emotions. If they're the glue and they're that important, you better have some self-awareness of what your body language is, what's coming out of your mouth, because there's more than one way we can show emotion, right? Does anybody want to take it from there?
So later on in the chapter, it says, Denson highlighted how an individual's emotional understanding can be developed through a variety of means, which can include vicarious emotional reflection. So kind of what you just talked about, where you reflect on, what is my body language saying? How are the words? How is my tone of the words that I'm saying coming off? How are other people, understanding what I'm saying? Sharing emotional experiences, so experiences of joy and loss. So being willing, like we talked about earlier, to be vulnerable with your athletes, but also building that rapport with them where you can celebrate those experiences of joy or that big win, or, maybe breaking out of a slump, even if it's something little, but something that helps you build that connection. And then the one that I thought was most important says emotional infection. So spreading optimism or pessimistic moods to others. And one thing that I will never forget that my college coach told me was it only takes 1 tablespoon of oil to ruin the drinking water in a battleship. So kind of relating that to pessimism, it just takes 1 bad egg in the batch to make the whole dugout, the whole field, the whole everything go south. And I think that's a battle, that coaches are always fighting. 1 bad egg, someone in a bad mood. In girls' sports, somebody's boyfriend broke up with them. Somebody's, it's their time of the month, whatever it might be, that, their emotions are all over the place, and then it ruins the emotions for the whole group.
And that's hard. And I mean, even as coaches, we may have a bad day, and it just kind of, we're the one that ends up, kind of being that oil in the water. So, we just, and my team this past year did Power of a Positive Team, and we talked about how it's just got to be that consistency. Like, and as a coach, we need to have that emotional consistency. That doesn't mean we can't have highs and lows, but our goal is to try to keep it as even keeled or as consistent as possible, so our kids know what they're getting from us. We don't want it to be oh gosh, is coach going to yell at me, or something happen? Is he going to jump my case, or is it going to be an okay day? So that consistency is very important. And in the chapter, it also talked about, I just had it. Crap. Basically, it talked about the bond and the relationship between the coach. Bonds with athletes and colleagues make emotional understanding possible. So, if you have that relationship and you have that understanding of, hey, this is what my athletes need, or I can be a little bit more emotional, or I don't need to be as emotional, but that relationship is kind of the key there, to kind of understand the emotions and what takes place after that emotion occurs with your athletes.
Yeah, later on in the chapter, it also moves on to talking about, emotional management and emotional labor. And I think, as coaches, we're expected to hold our emotions in, and sometimes we make mistakes too, we're vulnerable. But I think it's also, important to, there's no rule that says you can't apologize to an athlete or say, I was out of line, I shouldn't have reacted that way, I'm sorry. And I think just showing the kids that you're vulnerable too, you're not perfect, but working on finding ways to learn how to regulate your emotions is something that they're going to need with them for the rest of their lives. Whether it's a boss said something that made you mad, or your spouse said something that rubbed you the wrong way. It's something that you have to learn how to regulate beyond the realm of sports.
Yeah, I mean, emotional management is huge, and it talks about how it could lead to burnout, loss of the individual's sense of self. If the coach is unable to manage it and kind of maybe takes it out on the players. And it says presenting emotional front solely for the benefit of others. It's difficult. It makes it difficult for others to perform their jobs well. So that's just kind of, it's huge to be able to handle your emotions, and when you are out of line, again, like you said, Kelly, like, you just got to be able to be humble enough and say, I'm sorry for the way I acted, and the kids will get it, and it makes it better when you are willing to apologize than when you just kind of brush it to the side or just forget and don't say anything about it.
And, y'all making great points with the emotions and, and athletes. And, it can also be emotions with parents. It can also be, emotions with referees. I can remember when I was a lot younger and of a coach, and if I saw a bad call, I might go up and really get emotional with the referee, right? And did that do any good? Not a bit, right? And that referee, you're caught up in the emotions of the game as a coach sometimes, but you've already forgotten about how you treated a referee or an umpire or something, but that umpire hasn't forgotten, right? And it might be the next year or the year after, and they remember how you treated them 2 years ago, right? And now, as a result, it has a negative impact on your team. It was because of something you did 2 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So definitely, emotions are definitely this is a big chapter.
No, I will say I have had a coach, and my college coach did this. It was like a bad call or whatever, and he got so emotional they kicked him out of the game, and then it ended up kind of like lighting a fire in our team, and we came back and like used that emotion to kind of prove a point. So I mean, I get what the chapter's saying, but I've also have seen how the emotional management, and I think he understood what our team needed and to kind of light that fire, but he used the emotion to kind of push our team to challenge us to do what we're supposed to do, and kind of, we ended up coming back and winning the game, I think. But I have seen how emotions have played a part in kind of kicking a team in gear. So I think it goes back to coaches being able to manage it, but also knowing what their team needs and using it in an appropriate way. Again, appropriate way is a key word there. Chewing out an umpire, all over up and down is not really going to help, but doing something to get your team fired up may also help them.
Great point.
Yeah. And I think that, goes back and ties into the first thing we said about emotions. They can either be the glue that binds us together or what tears us apart. And I'll kind of end with this thought. One of our colleagues is doing their thesis on coaching burnout and athlete burnout. And I think, emotions play a big part in that. If you don't know how to recognize, this is at the end of the chapter, recognize, understand, and be vulnerable with your emotions, I think that is one of the key pieces that leads to burnout. So, talking with your athletes that, yes, these emotions are normal. Yes, it's okay to feel this way. But finding a way that might not necessarily be your sport, finding a way to handle those emotions, to relieve that stress, so you don't end up hating whatever it is, the umpire, the sport, whatever it might be. Do y'all have anything to add to finish up with emotions? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.